And welcome to Free Thought Matters. I'm Dan Barker. I'm co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We are the nation's largest association of free thinkers. That means atheists and agnostics and other types of non-believers. We work to keep state and church separate and to educate the public about the views of non-theists. You are welcome to join us in our vital work defending the First Amendment. Visit FFRF.org, where you can sign up as a member or where you can ask for a sample of our newspaper, Free Thought Today. So, what does the science of evolution have to say about the field of communication? James Lull is Professor Emeritus of Communication Studies at San Jose State University. He has taught in universities all over the world. He's authored many books that have been translated into many languages. His newest book, which just came out earlier this year, it's a groundbreaking synthesis of evolution and communication. It's called, appropriately, Evolutionary Communication, an Introduction. Welcome to Free Thought Matters.
Well, thank
Glad
you, Dan.
to have you here.
Thank you.
All the way from California.
Yeah.
Into this cold Wisconsin winter that we're having.
That's okay. I'm
here.
from Minnesota, so I'm prepared.
So you're ready for that.
Yeah.
So you sent me a copy of your book,
Yeah.
Evolutionary Communication, and I was fascinated. You call it a textbook.
Yeah.
But when I was reading it, it read like a textbook, but it read more relaxed. It read more like a popular science book. It was very accessible, and you're introducing a totally new idea, I think, in the field of communications. Tell us about why you wrote this book.
Well, I wrote the book because I do want to see more people who are teaching at the college and university level in communication, or communication studies, we call it sometimes, or communication arts, or communication sciences, or communication arts and sciences. It's a very wide open field, let's say, from a disciplinary standpoint. It's the edges are not real clear. But I wanted people in our field to have a sense of, hey, you know what? You can look at communication from an evolutionary perspective. And so the idea was to more or less develop a kind of sub-discipline within the discipline of communication studies focused on evolutionary approaches to understanding through the science
Because
of
that
evolution.
happens in other fields, right? It
Well, it
happens
does.
in psychology. Now there's evolutionary psychology.
Absolutely.
And of course biology.
Biology, sociology, economics. Psychology is probably the closest to communication in terms of determining the motives for why people are doing the things that they're doing in their everyday behavior.
So are you saying that our conversation right today, when we're communicating with each other, has some adaptive evolutionary explanation behind why we're sitting here talking like this?
Well, certainly we could come up with a variety of reasons for why we're talking like this. It could have to do with survival, the survival of your organization, the survival of my career, the potential for the book to make some money, that kind of stuff.
But it's instinctive too. I mean, we just can't help it because we evolved.
No, we're born talkers, and nobody has to encourage us to speak. We do that without any encouragement whatsoever. The more sophisticated aspects of communication, of course, require a lot of training to be able to write, to be able to use technology and so forth. But the instinct to communicate is just fundamental to all of organic life, not just to us, but to all of organic life. It's through communication that we're able to coordinate our behavior and form communities, and communities then provide the context for individual survival.
And it's not just humans.
Of course not. And you can see it in different gradations. I mean, if we look at it from the very beginning, let's go back 3.8 billion years ago, and talk about the very first forms of organic life.
I wasn't born then.
No, I wasn't either.
Was.
Although, sometimes I feel it feels like it. But the very first forms of life were bacteria cells, single cells. And how were they able to survive, reproduce, and eventually become far more complex organisms? Well, it was because they were instinctually able to communicate internally, which we would call intracellular communication, and also with other cells, extracellular communication, which gives them an opportunity to form groups and to determine limits to the size of their growth, for example, so that they can all survive together in the form of a group.
So I've always thought about the field of communications, at least at the college level, as more humanities, like rhetoric and that kind of stuff. But you're suggesting there's a science aspect to it as well. And that's why your book is so groundbreaking. Has there ever been a book like this before?
Not focused on evolution like that, but certainly there is a lot of science of communication. But it goes back not at all, in fact, to evolutionary lines of thinking, but to social psychology and psychology, particularly as those elements were being developed after World War II. So you mentioned rhetoric. Well, that takes us back to the so-called ancient Greeks, which wasn't all that long ago, and of course the forming of the political democracies over there, and the use of rhetoric in political persuasion, basically. So yes, we have rhetorical roots, theater. We also have technological roots in the form of radio, television, film, all of the media. So many times communications programs are very much oriented toward journalism, mass media, and then the other side of it can be the rhetorical side, which couples with social science. Like I was saying, communication is this extremely broad discipline.
Well, you told me that you really got interested in this when you visited Charles Darwin's house and you started reading some of Charles Darwin's writings about evolution and communication.
Right. Well, I was familiar, of course, with Darwin's basic arguments for quite a long time. And in some of my earlier books, I touched on how we create the gods we worship and that sort of stuff. So there was definitely an atheist inspiration that informed my earlier work. But then at one point I thought, well, I sense this so much personally, I need to dig into it as far as I can go. So I'm going to start with the original source of evolutionary theory. And of course, that's a little complicated too, but certainly Darwin stands as that person. And so I read The Descent of Man and The Origin of Species, and I looked for what Darwin was saying about communication in those classic volumes. He wasn't using the word communication directly very often, but you could infer from the language that he was using when he was referring to the way in which organisms were sending signals or interacting, and that was what I was taking notes on. So I was focused on that in Darwin, and that inspired a lot of the various categories of analysis that I do in the book.
So you're assuming the truth of the fact of evolution. Were you raised religious? Did you used to believe in creationism? Or?
No, I never believed in creationism, and I don't think my parents ever really tried to get me to think that way, but I was brought up into a Presbyterian church in southern Minnesota, in a small town where absolutely everybody went to church. You know, if you didn't go, if your dad didn't go, for example, he'd have a hard time in certain ways navigating through social circles and so forth. And this is in the 1940s and the 1950s. And we belonged to the church. I sang in the church choir. I even sang solos in the church choir when I was in 10th and 11th grade. I remember my dad one time gave me $5 after I sang a solo, which he thought was particularly good.
Well, $5 in the 1940s was
that was, yeah, well, 1950s, but yeah, that was worth a lot, yeah.
Wow. So, but was evolution and creationism a thing in your thinking back then?
It was just sort of looming like it does for people who are sort of loosely religious. My family was loosely religious. My mother was having chemical dependency problems. My family was kind of falling apart. We didn't always go to church on Sundays. I never could understand why we had to get up on Sundays anyway. And so that was kind of easy to get rid of that line of thinking.
So today you call yourself atheist, agnostic?
I call myself an atheist, yes, I do.
So how did that happen?
Well, I think that it more or less just happened from kind of you hear a lot of people say this, they just think about it. They just start thinking about it and being honest about it. And when you do that, you see that, well, you know, a lot of this stuff just seems made up to me, the religious stuff. And I don't have to follow that. I don't do that kind of thinking in other aspects of my life. Why would I do it here? And so gradually just got away from it. Went in the Army when I was 18, and so...
You were in Vietnam.
I was in Vietnam for my third year in the service.
And you were part of the Good Morning Vietnam radio show, weren't you?
Well, before that, I was a journalist in the Central Highlands of Vietnam for the 11th, for the 1st Air Cavalry Division. And then
Cavalry
later,
or cavalry?
Cavalry.
Cavalry.
Yeah. And we went down, yes, exactly, good distinction to make. And we went, and then I went down to Saigon. And yes, I did become part of Armed Forces Radio in Saigon for the last 6 months of my tour over there.
So were you in that movie, Good Morning America?
My role was played in that movie, but I was the guy that was on from midnight to 6 when Abe Cronauer, who was the star of the film, played by Robin Williams, he was on at 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I handed the station off to him every morning at 6, and that was my shift.
Did you have any dealing with religious chaplains in the military?
I did, and in some ways they were some of the nicest people to talk to because they weren't militaristically obvious, you know. It was a more of a, you could develop a friendship with them. And my office, when I was there, was kind of in the same proximity with the chaplain for the unit that I went to Vietnam with. And he and I just became friends, yeah. So,
wow. So, well, that's part of the, I guess, the whole picture. You know, you're being taken away from home into some strange area.
And you know, my mom sewed a cross on the inside of my patch that I wore on my arm.
That kept you alive.
And I told her, I said, "What's that for, Mom?" And she said, "That's for good luck." And I said, rabbit's foot, dream catcher, cross, all works kind of the same way.
Of course, we do know there are and have been atheists in foxholes and in Humvees, and people who prayed have not survived, you know, compared. It's just really kind of dumb luck, a lot of that is. So you were involved in communication way back then on radio?
Yes, I was. Even before that, in high school in that little southern Minnesota town, Sunday mornings on KRFO, radio from Owatonna, I put on the church programs. And, you know, had the connection to the Lutheran church where they played the program every morning on Sunday. And I played the music of the time, which was, you know, for the old folks and so forth. So, and read the news. And so it was actually great training, great exposure to the wider world, just looking at the AP teletype, bringing in stories from everywhere, you know, when I was a kid, and being responsible for choosing those stories and putting them on the air. That was fun.
So we have to take a break here. So hold that thought, because I want to talk about religion and communication as well, which is a big part of your book. We're talking with Professor James Lull, author of the new book, Evolutionary Communication, and Introduction. We'll be right back after this.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist, and I'm alarmed by the intrusions of religion into our secular government. That's why I'm asking you to support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics, working to keep state and church separate, just like our founding fathers intended. Please support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
My name is Gabrielle Hinahara, and I'm an atheist because I believe in the power of doing good for the sake of doing good, and not because some divine entity tells you what is good and what's not, and not because you think it will get you into some sort of heavenly afterlife. I believe in human morality, which is why I think that most cultures across the world have come to the kind of same basic principles and values, such as the Golden Rule, which isn't based in religion, but is based in human interactions and mutual respect. And I think a lot of people turn to religion because it makes the choice of morality really easy, black and white, right and wrong, and you don't have to decide which is which. And in my experience as being an atheist through my life, I've found that moral choices are something that I think about a lot more than a lot of other people because nobody's telling me the answer. And since I don't believe in an afterlife, pretty much my whole meaning in life is based on my interactions with other people, and that I can leave this world a better place by my actions.
Thank you for watching Free Thought Matters. You can find more content by the Freedom from Religion Foundation at our website, ffrf.org. Follow FFRF on Facebook, and you'll get notifications about all of our content, including whenever we go live on FFRF's Ask an Atheist. FFRF is also on YouTube, where all of our programs, including this show and our weekly news bites, are available to watch anytime. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on the web.
And welcome back to Free Thought Matters. We're continuing our conversation with James Lull, author of the new book, just came out this year, a groundbreaking book about evolution and communication, titled appropriately, Evolutionary Communication and Introduction. So you rejected the idea of creationism from your religious upbringing, became a non-believer. But in your teaching experience, did you have any trouble with students or maybe even other faculty who have a problem with the fact of evolution?
Well, in the preface of the book, I do talk about that problem because it's widespread, not just for professors of communication, but for professors of biology, of natural sciences. You've got the indoctrination of religion is so deep that even people who have got a perfectly legitimate platform for explaining the truth about how we all got here and how everything around us got here have to apologize in a way. And in a sense, the compromise has been, well, just try to get them to be a little bit more open-minded if you can do that. Then that opens the door. You're not going to be able to, as someone said once, you can't reason somebody into a position that they weren't reasoned into in the first place. So this is an emotional element there, which is impossible to overcome no matter how many facts you've got, simply on that basis. It has to be broader than that. In my case, I remember one time when I was not related to religion directly, but I was showing the movie Strawberry and Chocolate. I had just been to Cuba in 1994. And that movie had come out. That's a movie about a gay character. And at the beginning of the film, there is a scene with a heterosexual couple making love. It's not at all, I want to say, it doesn't have any lewd parts to it. It just, obviously, that's what they're doing. And one of my students came up to me afterwards, it was almost having a meltdown and telling me he just couldn't stand this. And why? Well, his religious upbringing had taught him that he shouldn't be exposed to this kind of thing. And I thought, wow, this guy's 20, 21 years old and he's thinking like that. So you never know when you're going to find the resistance.
But there are a lot of believers who accept the fact of evolution. I mean,
yes.
I used to be opposed to it, but then I realized, well, who am I to dictate to God how he could not have created the world? He could have. A lot of believers believe in God, and they think God used evolution as the tool. So so they're not necessarily incompatible.
No, and as the science gets more and more sophisticated and less deniable, then there's more and more room inside being accommodated for scientific explanations, kind of like evolution light, to be built into the religious arguments. Because I think, for one thing, the younger generations are understanding what's going on, so their parents and their grandparents are going to get a little bit of it that way, too.
So before we talk about your chapter in here about religion, I just want to say that one of the things that really hit me when I read your book is the fact that you claim that communication wasn't just some instinct or some characteristic of the human species that developed with our development, but communication actually was the motor. Communication was the driving force of evolution, and that's a novel concept. Can you explain that just a little bit?
Well, it's the precursor of evolutionary development, or what we want to call development, or human development, or organic development, biological development, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, going back to the bacteria and the single cell and the natural ability of those cells to communicate internally and externally. Then that DNA gets built into every organism that they create.
But do we communicate because we evolved, Or did we evolve because we communicated?
We evolved originally because we communicated, but then as we learned to communicate in more and more sophisticated ways, that enhanced our evolutionary process, both biologically and culturally, technologically.
Especially when you're talking about a social species
Exactly.
like us.
Absolutely.
You and I are sitting here with these ancient instincts of social understanding and theory of mind, or whatever you want to call that evolved so that we could survive as a group.
And the tribalism too. I mean, we're sitting here with the tribalism also.
So talking about tribalism then, your chapter on ideology and religion connects that to the field of communications.
Well, what I try to do, Dan, in that chapter is to show that religion shouldn't be thought of strictly as a kind of a cultural development or the evolution of culture in a certain way. It isn't, because after all, religion does provide certain functional advantages that people can feel because they become members of communities. They're born into these things, and you understand better than...
Well, church is a good place to find a date.
Absolutely. A sexual partner, let's get real. But as our communication skills developed and our technology developed, we then became more able to use those skills in order to communicate more effectively with each other.
So in that chapter, you talk about how evolution deals with the biosphere, all living things, and even trees communicate through their roots and their like communities. But you also use the word, how do you pronounce it, idiosphere?
Idiosphere. So we take the biosphere, we say most people think of the biosphere when they hear the word evolution, but evolution is also connected to the idiosphere, so the world of ideas, and I would call it the system of ideas. But more than just ideas, it's also ideals with an L. So you have ideas and ideals, because ideology always has a goal. It's never innocent. It has motion, movement. So a system of ideas and ideals is what we would call ideology. Now, I sort of redress the notion of theology and call it a system of ideas and ideals that have to do with religious thought.
To drive it.
Sure. So it isn't just the ideas, but it's also the aspiration that goes along with religion that makes it so powerful.
Do ideas and ideals evolve? I mean, are they part of evolution, or are they parallel to?
Well, if we look at it from a critical perspective, even just looking back at Marxism as how they explain economic determinism, for example, you see there that you have an economic base, which moves then into the institutions of society, which then goes off into the individuals who make up that society, who spread all those ideas around. That's called hegemony. So the hegemony is a very powerful construct in sociology and in communication studies too. So if we think of it in religious terms, then we have religious hegemony, the power of all of the symbolic forms around us that have been orchestrated by religious institutions and individuals to evangelize and to bring people and keep people into the religious communities. These are the amount of symbolic forms that are orchestrated to do that is just immense. Just look around you. And it starts with the logos, the Christian cross. The
logos? The word?
Yeah, we call them, well, the logos, but also the ideas that those are symbols, religious symbols that have tremendous currency.
Well, that reminds me of the first verse of the book of John. In the beginning was the Word. Even in Christian theology, words, communications, ideas, language is a big part. The names of God in Islam, all these names and words that are so important.
So important, and what do they mean? They all have to do with submission.
Yeah.
So submission to, and that's very ideological, to give in. The power of hegemony is to make people feel that how they feel is natural and normal. And so I go along with that.
So why do we do that? Was there an evolutionary benefit to having people be like sheep before a shepherd? Or?
Certainly. This goes off into another chapter in the book on information. The power and the importance of information, and why we have to trust the people who give us information. And so when we have religious leaders, leaders in our societies who are giving us rules to live by and so forth, as children, we trust that because it's in our best interest to trust those who can take care of us for our own survival purposes, and later for reproduction. And there's a third idea in here. It isn't just survival and reproduction. Those are the two that are mentioned most often when we talk about evolutionary theory. But it's also expression. So in the beginning there was the word. Well, in the beginning there was also the instinct to communicate. And beyond just survival and reproduction, people also communicate just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
Expressiveness, so much an important part of our life.
Music and art. You cover some of the cave paintings, for example, from way back in northern Spain and in France. And
Yes, from Spain and France and also Germany and parts of Italy.
how far back does that go? Like 20,000?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. The Neanderthals were actually the originators of some of those cave paintings now that are found in Europe. We didn't know that a few years ago. That's been found to be true, and that goes back 60,000 years. So if we look at the cave paintings that Homo sapiens are responsible for, that's more in the range of 35 to 40,000 years. And that's during a period when there was a tremendous cultural upsurge and all kinds of artistic forms were being developed during that time.
I think some of that artwork would stand in a modern museum today. I mean, some of the expression on that, when you look at it, you know, pretty amazing.
And they were also using chanting and drumming and all kinds of other forms of communication while they were doing the painting and while they were experiencing it later.
Wow, well, there's so much to talk about. We're really out of time here. I did read that some of the most elaborate caves were also the most acoustic.
Absolutely, because they create great
There must
sound.
have been drumming or singing or something.
Multimedia.
Well, thank you so much, James Lull. The book is called Evolutionary Communication, an Introduction, and so I hope the book does well. I hope it broadens our understanding of the humanities and the sciences together.
Yeah, I hope communication studies can pick up on it as a viable way of going forward.
Thank you very much. And thank you for watching Free Thought Matters, because free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.